Hello, everybody. Welcome to our newest podcast session of the town of Kiowa Island. My name is Michael Heidingsfelder, and I'm one of your elected town council members of Kiowa Island. Today's session will shed a spotlight on a very important topic for our island and for all property owners. The question around how are we protecting this island against rising sea levels and changing weather patterns. Now, this question was raised a while ago, actually, so the town has been very active in creating one of the very first, at least in our state, if not in our nation, so-called marsh management plans. And this plan was developed by the town in collaboration with the Homeowners Association, so KICA, and the Conservancy. We all have to understand the marsh surrounding our island on the northern side, but also on the western and eastern side of the island, is really our first defense against the elements of nature. So we need to be really careful what we are doing with the marsh, and especially how, like the dunes, we can make sure they are protected and can continue to protect us. That's a little bit the context for today's podcast. So I have the great pleasure today to welcome two individuals to our podcast series who have been very instrumental in actually developing this marsh management plan for us, and also now are the key drivers behind the implementation of this plan. So first of all, Madeleine Kaye. Thank you very much, Madeleine, to be here. One of our many volunteers here in the town of Kiowa Island. She's a member of the town's planning commission, a key community member that is involved in what we are talking about, the marsh management plan, but you're also a key member for our ARB revitalization concept. And I'm sure I forgot some of your roles in this community. So Madeleine, thank you very much for being here today and being such a valuable resource for our island.
Thank you, Michael.
John Taylor, our planning director, is the other gentleman that I'm happy to welcome here today. The marsh management plan falls into his area of responsibility, but I also experienced, John, that you're very passionate about this. It's not just one of your roles, but it's really something that's close to your heart. So thank you, John, for being here today and talking to us. Now, let's start with a few data points, John. I think just to make sure that the community understands the magnitude of what we are talking about. So when you look at how large our island is and how large is the marsh, can you put that in a context for us?
Yeah, so Kiowa, when we think about land mass, it's almost 8,500 acres. When we think about marsh, you can say nearly 3,800 acres. So we're talking a great percentage of the entire makeup of Kiowa being comprised of salt marsh. That's nearly 45% when you look at just open water and marsh. That's nearly 50% or better of sort of the character of Kiowa. I think most times when people identify with Kiowa, they think firstly the beach. Of course, we have 10 miles of beach, but the opposite side is of the northern, eastern, and western side of Kiowa is a significant part of our DNA.
I mean, just to understand, so 55% roundabout of our island is marshland and the water that is surrounded by this marshland, which I think is a very impressive number. And I'm not sure that everybody on the island really realizes how important that is to us. So tell us a little bit about the health of the marsh, because I think that was also one of the driving elements for the marsh management plan.
Right. So I think it's important to understand how we begin to assess the health of the marsh. There are a number of entities, a number of groups, a number of agencies who help us to really get a good understanding of that. We know certain areas of the marsh is really healthy. We know other areas are eroding. That's in fact that you can look at your own property as a property owner and look at how that critical line has moved over time. One of those things you can do is look at where vegetation now is. Maybe it's now mud flats. Maybe those speak to that. The other thing is you actually can utilize habitat in assessments of how birds utilize the marsh to know migration patterns. That tells us about the health of the marsh. So there are a number of factors. The other component to that just being flooding, right? And how much flooding the marsh can. The marsh is a big protection barrier for the island, and so how much water that marsh can absorb. We've seen rising seas over time.
So it works like a sponge.
Works exactly like a sponge.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying that there are areas along the island that are critical, that are maybe not in perfect health, let's say it this way. I always remember when I drive by on Kiowa Island Parkway shortly before the bridge and I look to the right, that's probably one of those areas that you would consider not in great shape, correct?
So that is one of the areas that has been identified as that the health of the marsh it needs some help. It is one that is either eroding. It has been a challenged area because of a number of circumstances, right? Boat traffic, unregulated access, a number of things that have contributed over the years to the health of that area.
Yeah. So I think we will talk about this later. But first, Madeleine, I really want to understand what has sparked your interest, your emotion, so to speak, about the marsh and the health of the marsh and the marsh protection.
It's really been an evolution, Michael. Probably my first exposure was listening to a report that Jack Coates and Dave Pumphrey presented to our world. This is several years back, and the primary focus was on sea level rise. And then we read some reports from Nicole Elko and her group. She's been our primary consultant that talked about the overall environmental health of the island. And then we saw some reports out of the Conservancy on projects like the rain gardens. So all of this built an interest over time and growing awareness of the importance of the marsh. It's the first line of defense and the second line and the third line of defense against storms, against erosion. And it is, as you guys have already mentioned, it's such a significant percentage of the acreage on this island that we weren't paying that close attention to before. One of the things for me that was so surprising from Nicole Elko's work was the relative health of the oceanfront and the dunes and the vegetation there. But we had paid less attention to the marsh. So the focus has started to shift, and I think it's great.
Okay, wonderful. John, I think now we understand a little bit the context and the importance and the relevance of all of this. Explain us in a few words, what is a marsh management plan?
So that's a good question. So the state of South Carolina requires all of our coastal communities to put together a plan to how the beach is managed. And so our town, Kiowa, we've always had a beach management plan, which tells us what things to look out for, when should we renourish. But there is no guidance today in the state regarding the marsh as far as a mandate. And so we have a healthy beach on Kiowa, and I think most residents, most property owners are aware of the great draw the beach is itself. However, when you look at our most risks, and a lot of the work, I have to kind of go back really to 2017, 2018, flood mitigation and sea level rise subcommittee produced a report that really gave us the inclination that we need to pay attention more to the marsh because of its risks. And so the marsh management plan itself is a tool that gives us guidance of how we should engage the marsh. How should we look at protecting the marsh? How should we look at really strategizing to ensure that this natural resource, is most efficient in the long term? And so that guidance from the marsh management plan, and we've had some help to develop that plan with some consultant teams. Nicole Elko's name has been referenced several times, Biohabitats. They're the team that helped us put together that plan. And so this is really a true first of its kind in the state, of it really paying attention comprehensively to what we as a community would look at in managing our marsh.
Yeah. And my understanding really is that, there are various elements in this plan that goes from regularly monitoring the state of the marsh, which I think the Conservancy is very much involved in to help us with this, but also to really implement countermeasures if marsh areas are endangered, not in the very best health. Is that
Right.
The correct description?
The way the actual plan is broken out into really 3 or 4 significant points. One of those you mentioned is to monitor. That was the first thing that we recognized, that in order to really know what actions to take, we really need to understand exactly what's happening. So there are a number of metrics to know the quantity of marsh, the eroding factors, and looking at different assessments, metrics rather, to know the health of the marsh. Full Servancy has been a great partner in doing that with the town. But understanding the health, that's monitoring. The second is really regulating. And this is particular actions that would be developed in the future. Right now, that's being studied, and we'll get to that as part of this discussion. The other is really looking at we have monitoring, regulating, protection. Protection more so of areas that are really of concern, right? So we have begun to put together plans to look at what areas that might be more critical than others. We mentioned the area about the Kiowa River Bridge, which we'll talk about, but that's really looking at areas within the marsh that really are unhealthy or could be improved based on a number of factors, like I mentioned earlier.
Okay, excellent. So I could imagine that some people will say, leave this to nature, it will regulate itself, don't do anything. But what would happen if we are not jumping into action here? What do you think will that mean for our island if we don't implement this marsh management plan?
I think it would be the same approach as we do at the beach, right? There are critical moments where nature will correct itself, but it's important as us to be good stewards. If we don't do those things, we can see quickly eroding areas. We can see that those areas spread to areas that we would want to keep in its natural form, in its best health, in its state. I just think it's being responsible. And I think as a town, as a community, it's important for us to do that.
Good. So being that good steward that you're referring to, what are really the driving data points from your perspective that should all make us concerned and work hand in hand to protect our marsh?
Really, I think I would probably lean on a few data points. The rising of tides and flooding. We all know that flooding on the island is an occurrence. It happens not even when we have a significant storm or event. And with flooding, that gives us an indication of where our control points are. So where our drainage patterns are, how stormwater management happens. Those are true data points that I think are significant when you look at sea level rise, when we look at all of those inundated flooding. When you put all those things together, we really can identify areas across the island that are at risk or could be improved from a drainage standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so the marsh plays a critical role in that, in the comprehensive way that we address flooding. So I would say flooding is one of the big factors, a tangible metric that we can look at.
And Madeleine, I think this is probably where we as property owners, people that come to the island, live on the island, see that something is going on when there's a rainy day, when there's water standing on the streets, when we have more and more, as it feels at least, more and more king tides coming our way. So do you think that the community is really aware of all of this and can yet connect these data points and actually will support and does support the marsh management plan?
I think that the awareness is growing, and it's evolving process. But the Conservancy gave a terrific presentation to our world earlier this month. Attendance was remarkable. And I have been getting questions from friends and neighbors ever since that program. They know I'm on the Planning Commission and they want to know what the town is doing about protecting the marsh. It's hard to ignore the increasing frequency and increasing intensity of storms. We all see it. We see how water runs from our roofs, down our driveways, down the roads. And we know that water can get polluted along the way. So, yeah, the community is getting more and more aware of the scope of the issue and what the town can do about it and how they as individual property owners can help to mitigate the situation. And we've got some examples of some projects that are currently underway.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most interesting one is well, the one that is most immediate in terms of ability to implement is the rain garden project. And the Conservancy, once again, who's been a terrific partner throughout this whole process, has worked with the town to tackle 2 rain garden projects, one right here at Town Hall and one up at Reds Bluff. And do you want to talk about the concept behind rain gardens? You want me to? Go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, the concept is to capture stormwater. And so you, with very specific dimensions, you dig a bowl-like indentation in the ground. You plant native grass in there, so you have some aesthetic value. You put mulch on top so that you get drainage being helped. And these gardens act as natural filtration systems. They capture the stormwater, and then slowly it's allowed to seep into the ground. And in that process, the pollutants are removed. So instead of having polluted water running directly into our creeks, into our rivers, you have this very natural solution. And it works really probably best on individual property owners' lots. So the town's coming up with some guidelines on how to go about.
So these 2 locations that you mentioned, one here at the town, at the municipal center, and the other one at Reds Bluff, are basically kind of showcases.
Yes.
I would say, right? So for community members to come to learn how something like this would look like, and even enhance, the beauty of properties, then to really decide together with their landscaper to implement something like this at every individual's home, because we have the downspouts from the roofs that, for example, at my house, just run into the ground, and capturing the water, but especially also the pollutants is, I think, the key thing. So beside monitoring, we talked about this, but really jumping into action. So the rain garden is one project. I know that there are 2, 3 other ones. Madeleine and John, can you talk a little bit to the community about the other big action items that the Marsh Management Plan has created?
Right. So in developing the Marsh Management Plan, there were a number of recommendations that were put forth. And the best way that we as a group community decided to move forward with those number of recommendations is find 3 priority. And so 3 priority recommendations or actions were developed. And those 3 were: 1, we felt that we really needed to educate and make the community aware of what's this process, what is marsh management. There are a lot of language barriers and understanding what the health of the marsh. And so really communicating why we're doing this, what's the importance, and then how people eventually will be able to get involved in what they can do on the individual property. So a really robust communications effort is one of those parts of the first priority.
And we've seen some of this already happening in our e-newsletter, where we are trying to start to educate the community about these things. Yeah.
And so the second component to that are, 1, we want to look at impervious surfaces. That was a subgroup of our work group that was formed to really focus on what can we do as a community to address pervious and impervious surfaces. More particular was mentioned the rain gardens. That somewhat falls in one of those solution-oriented action items that can be done, right? Because it's really addressing stormwater runoff, it's addressing filtration, it's addressing we know the studies that have been with our groundwater, and how saltwater intrusion can affect our groundwater. So impervious surfaces, one of those things as far as action items, is studying where on the island can we essentially convert a greater mass of impervious surfaces to pervious surfaces. And right now in our subcommittee is really trying to figure out best ways to incentivize that for the homeowner. How do we educate the property owners to do that on their own without having a regulation to do that? But there are a number of things. For example, Kika, one of the larger property owners of trails and parking, what metrics or things that we can add in our toolbox to say what would happen if you did utilize this type of technology as far as a permeable material opposed to asphalt, and what would that do tremendously to help overall the number of or percentage of impervious across the island?
I mean, I've seen on the island a lot of the new buildings that have been constructed over the last 2 or 3 years, that more and more of these new driveways, for example, are permeable surfaces, right? But we are an island that has developed over the last 40 years, so we have a lot of properties that still have the traditional concrete driveway. So you're saying one of the measures that your work group is focusing on is how to incentivize the property owners of those older properties, or not most recent properties, to actually tear up their concrete driveways or portion of it and replace it with a surface that can really absorb the water instead of kind of pushing it into the marsh or the neighboring canal.
Yes, and we have examples of neighborhoods that have taken that initiative on themselves. Oceanwoods is one of those. As a neighborhood, they decided that they wanted to look at a new way to do that, and so one of those things that we use that as an example to study as part of a subgroup. How can we get other neighborhoods potentially collectively working with contractors, because potentially we can get a cheaper rate to do that type of work when you look at the massing. So there are a number of examples, I think, that are out there, and we just want to be able to continue to spread that word. We know that there are examples, for example, the sandcastle, of how that parking treatment or water, the pavers that allow water to percolate through in between. So we have some examples. It's just trying to get more and more of those examples out.
I think it's really important to recognize that when the Planning Commission took the Comprehensive Marsh Management Plan to the council unanimously approved it. Obviously, it was a good idea. And that was when we decided to create this intra-island entity. And so all of the things that John and I have been talking about, these initiatives, have been the product of a really broad group of people that represent the town and Kika, the Conservancy, the partners, the ARB.
We also have residents on that.
Even the county. So everybody's been working, brainstorming very collaboratively to come up with some of these approaches and things like, can we incentivize these projects? So we have some real good brain power that's involved in this project.
Great. So before we close, I want to learn a little bit more about the area that we already touched upon at the Kiowa River Bridge. So when you leave the island, you pass Mingo Point, you come to the bridge, and especially on the right side, we have that area that has been left to a multiple type of uses over the years that have really, I think, been a negative impact on the marsh. So I also understand that's also one of your areas of focus where you want to make a change. So let's talk about this a little bit.
As a matter of fact, this is the most current thing that we have dealt with. We had a meeting last week, and there was a presentation on what kind of plans we can move forward with, actually take to town council. I think at your next meeting or two coming up. That part of the marsh that you're referencing is an area where fishermen and crabbers go, and sometimes even kayakers. And so they meander their way down to the marsh, and it has created some problems. It has damaged the health of the marsh. So the plan that is being put forward is the creation of a ramp from that parking area right in front of the bridge as you're leaving the area down to the marsh with maybe a couple of platforms too, or maybe something on the other side of the road. We need to further study it. But the point is that you're going to kayak, you have access to Mingo Point. It's a couple hundred yards down the road. It's very easy. And it's a bona fide kayak launch site. If you're going to fish crab, you can do that off of platform. But in the meantime, we'll keep foot traffic and kayak traffic all on that marsh, and that will help protect it, enhance it, and hopefully bring it back.
So this all sounds like we will see probably early in 24, the first real implementations of these measures from these different work groups. Is that a correct statement, John?
Yeah, so we made a goal that within this first year, we'll try to have a recommendation brought to council. And the first one of this recommendation would be something for that Kiowa River Bridge project. We're really close, I think. There's still some things to study, of course. But early 2024, I think that would be a really good indicator of having at least 2 of those recommendations begin to see some fruit.
Great. Thank you very much. This was very interesting. I have to say I learned a lot as well. So this was great. I really, really want to thank you both, Madeleine and John, not only for being here, but especially to really focusing on this so important work. And I think I'm confident that, everybody who has been listening now really understands how important not only the marsh, but also this marsh management plan is. And I hope that a lot of people also understood that they can contribute also themselves to some of these measures, for example, by thinking about changing the surface of their driveway or portions of it. I think that's very important. And it will help us to keep this island safe in whatever nature brings upon us in the future. So thank you very much for this. This was another hopefully enjoyable podcast for all of you as part of our series to bring hopefully interesting topics, but also interesting people to you through this media. We have a great number of new podcasts under development, so please stay tuned for the announcement coming to our website and our weekly newsletter. And for now, thank you for listening and stay healthy on the island. Thank you.